Welcome to History Recapped, where we break down the most important moments in history. Today we're diving deep into one of the most significant events of the modern era, the American Revolution. A war that began as a colonial rebellion would ignite a movement for liberty that reshaped the world. From tea-drenched harbors to battlefield heroics, from stirring declarations to a new nation born in struggle, this is the full story of the American Revolution. Let's set the stage. It's the mid-18th century. The 13 American colonies are growing rapidly in population and prosperity, yet they remain part of the British Empire, subject to British law and royal authority. The colonies were politically fragmented, each with its own governor and assembly, but shared a growing sense of identity rooted in Enlightenment ideals, economic ambition, and opposition to imperial control. Colonial newspapers, taverns, and churches became forums for the exchange of political ideas. Tensions between Britain and its colonies begin to rise after the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763. Though Britain emerged victorious, the war left it deeply in debt. The British government began imposing taxes on the American colonies to recoup its expenses. The colonists, however, had no representatives in Parliament, giving rise to the famous phrase, "No taxation without representation." The first major spark came with the Stamp Act of 1765, requiring colonists to pay taxes on printed materials such as newspapers, legal documents, and playing cards. Outrage spread. Colonial leaders organized protests, and in some cases violence erupted. Mobs in Boston intimidated stamp distributors, and widespread boycotts pressured Parliament to repeal the Act. Though the Stamp Act was withdrawn, it left a lingering sense of injustice and fear of further encroachments. The Stamp Act Congress met in New York, bringing together representatives from several colonies to draft a unified response, a precursor to the later Continental Congress. Next came the Townshend Acts in 1767, imposing duties on imports like glass, paper, paint, and tea. These acts not only taxed goods, but also allowed for the use of writs of assistance, general search warrants that violated colonists' rights to privacy. Resistance flared once again. The colonies began to organize non-importation agreements, and colonial women played a key role in producing homespun goods to replace British imports. Political groups such as the Sons of Liberty and Daughters of Liberty emerged, using both public demonstrations and underground tactics to resist British control. In 1770, tensions boiled over in Boston. British soldiers fired into a crowd, killing 5 civilians in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Paul Revere's famous engraving of the event helped fuel anti-British sentiment throughout the colonies. John Adams, future president, even defended the British soldiers in court to demonstrate the rule of law, but public outrage continued to mount. The incident became a rallying cry for colonial unity and resistance. Then came the Tea Act of 1773. Though it actually lowered the price of tea, it maintained the principle that Britain could tax the colonies. In protest, American patriots, dressed as Mohawk Indians, boarded British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor, a defiant act now known as the Boston Tea Party. This event was widely celebrated in some colonies and condemned in others, but it clearly escalated tensions. In response, the British government passed the coercive acts called the Intolerable Acts by the colonists. These included closing Boston Harbor, revoking Massachusetts' charter, and allowing British officials accused of crimes to be tried in Britain. Outrage spread throughout the colonies. Not only in Massachusetts, town meetings were restricted, and the Quartering Act forced colonists to house British soldiers in private homes. In 1774, colonial leaders convened the First Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered to coordinate resistance. They agreed to form militias, boycott British goods, and prepare petitions to the king. The Congress also called for a second meeting if grievances were not addressed, laying the groundwork for future unity. They issued the Declaration and Resolves, affirming colonial rights and urging King George III to redress their complaints. Then, in April 1775, came the shots heard round the world. British troops marched to Lexington and Concord to seize colonial weapons. American militiamen confronted them. A skirmish broke out and the British were forced to retreat to Boston, suffering significant casualties along the way. The American Revolution had begun. News of the battle spread quickly, and militia from across New England converged to lay siege to Boston. Soon after, the Second Continental Congress convened and named George Washington as commander of the Continental Army. A Virginian leading a New England army was a deliberate attempt to unify the colonies. Though poorly trained and poorly equipped, the American forces had one powerful advantage: they were fighting for their homes and their freedom. Washington quickly took command of the army outside Boston and began organizing the defenses. In June 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill took place, primarily on Breed's Hill. The British eventually captured the position but suffered over 1,000 casualties. It proved that American forces could stand up to British regulars, boosting morale. The phrase, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," is often attributed to this battle. Throughout 1775 and early 1776, the colonies moved closer to independence. Thomas Paine published Common Sense, a pamphlet that made a compelling case for breaking away from Britain. It attacked monarchy, promoted republicanism, and was widely read throughout the colonies, influencing public opinion. It sold over 100,000 copies in just a few months, a massive number for the time. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson with input from John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. The document proclaimed that all men are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It listed grievances against King George III and declared the colonies to be free and independent states. Copies were distributed and read aloud across the colonies, igniting hope and determination. The war intensified. In late 1776, Washington crossed the Delaware River on Christmas night and launched a surprise attack on Hessian forces in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory boosted American morale and was followed by another win at Princeton, helping to reinvigorate the revolutionary cause after earlier defeats. These battles demonstrated Washington's skill in using timing and surprise to overcome disadvantages in manpower and resources. But 1777 brought one of the most pivotal moments of the war, the Battle of Saratoga. American forces, led by Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, defeated a large British army under General Burgoyne. Arnold, though later infamous as a traitor, played a heroic role in the victory. The success convinced France to formally enter the war as an ally of the United States. This marked a turning point by internationalizing the conflict. French support proved crucial. France provided money, supplies, naval power, and troops. Spain and the Netherlands would also later support the American cause, turning the war into a global conflict. French military leaders like Marquis de Lafayette became close allies of Washington and played key roles in coordinating attacks and securing supplies. Despite setbacks, Washington kept the army together through harsh winters, including the brutal winter at Valley Forge in 1777-1778. The army suffered from cold, hunger, and disease, but Washington's leadership and the training provided by Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, helped transform the Continental Army into a more effective fighting force. Steuben introduced standardized drills, discipline, and organization, which greatly improved battlefield performance. The war shifted south in its later stages. In the Carolinas and Georgia, a vicious guerrilla war developed. American commanders like Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, harassed British troops and undermined their control using hit-and-run tactics and knowledge of the local terrain. Greene's strategy of avoiding large battles while constantly engaging and retreating exhausted the British forces. Meanwhile, British forces under General Cornwallis moved into Virginia. In 1781, they established a base at Yorktown. Washington, with the help of French troops under General Rochambeau and the French Navy under Admiral de Grasse, surrounded the British. The coordination of land and naval forces was a military masterpiece. The French Navy successfully blocked British reinforcements by sea, sealing Cornwallis's fate. The Siege of Yorktown was the final major engagement of the war. After weeks of bombardment and no hope of reinforcements, Cornwallis surrendered on October 19, 1781. The surrender ceremony was a dramatic moment, with British officers notably refusing to hand over their swords to Washington himself, instead offering them to his subordinate. Though it took 2 more years of negotiation, the war was essentially over. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, formally ended the conflict. Britain recognized the independence of the United States and ceded territory east of the Mississippi River. American diplomats like Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams secured favorable terms. The treaty also addressed issues such as fishing rights and the return of property to loyalists. The American Revolution wasn't just a war, it was a radical experiment in democracy. For the first time, a colony had broken away from its imperial ruler and established a government based on Enlightenment ideals. The principles of popular sovereignty, rule of law, and individual rights became foundational to the new nation. The revolution inspired movements across the globe, from France to Haiti to Latin America. It also exposed contradictions. Freedom was declared, yet slavery persisted. Native American tribes, often siding with the British in hopes of halting colonial expansion, were left vulnerable. Women contributed greatly to the war effort as spies, fundraisers, and even fighters, yet their rights remained limited. Abigail Adams famously urged her husband John to remember the ladies when forming the new government. In 1787, just 4 years after the war, delegates met in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution. The result was the United States Constitution, creating a federal republic with checks and balances, separation of powers, and a Bill of Rights added shortly after to protect individual liberties. The Constitution replaced the Articles of Confederation, which had proved too weak to govern effectively. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected the first President of the United States. His leadership, humility, and decision to step down after 2 terms set a precedent for democratic governance. Washington's presidency helped stabilize the new nation and provided a model for peaceful transitions of power. The American Revolution reshaped the political landscape of the world. It was a fight for liberty, for representation, and for the right of a people to determine their own destiny. It was not perfect, but it laid the groundwork for the ongoing struggle to realize those ideals. Its legacy continues to influence movements for freedom and justice around the globe. Thank you for watching History Recapped. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Tell us, what moment in history should we recap next? Until next time, keep learning and keep history alive.